The coffee is done. The house is quiet. And somewhere in the back of your mind, not loud, not dramatic, is a question that showed up sometime in the last year or two. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, like a man waiting in a room nobody asked him to wait in. The question is, what do I do with this silence? Not today's silence. This silence. The kind that has been here since the kids grew up and left, since the job ended, since the marriage changed or ended, since the person who used to be in that other chair in the morning stopped being there. That silence. You've been filling it with projects and errands and calls and staying busy the way men stay busy when staying busy is the only thing standing between them and a question they don't know how to answer. But you found this video, which means the silence got loud enough to look for something. 27% of Americans over 60 live alone. For men specifically, more than 1 in 5 men between 65 and 74 live alone. By age 75, it's nearly 1 in 4. That is millions of men in houses and apartments across this country, waking up in the morning with no one to say good morning to. Not because they failed, not because they're broken, because life moved in the directions that life moves. Retirement, divorce, widowhood, grown children, and the structure that used to fill the house with people and purpose and noise quietly dismantled itself over years. And those millions of men, most of them, are carrying something they have no language for. Because men of our generation were not given the language for this. We were given the language for achievement, for doing, for providing, for being useful. Nobody gave us the language for, I used to matter to the structure of my day, and now the structure is gone, and I don't know what I am without it. Until today. I'm Marcus, and if you're a man over 60 who is living alone, by choice, by circumstance, by the way life landed, and you've been wondering what to do with a silence that feels different from the quiet you used to enjoy, this is about the mechanism underneath that silence, what it's actually asking you, and what the men who answered it correctly found on the other side. I want to be very direct about something first. This video is not going to tell you to stay busy. It's not going to give you a list of senior center activities. It's not going to tell you that you need to open up or be more vulnerable. Those are answers to a different question. The question you're carrying is deeper than loneliness, and it deserves a deeper answer. I want to name the thing underneath the silence, because until you name it, you can't work with it. For most men who grew up in the generation I'm talking to, the 60s, 70s baby boomers, identity was built almost entirely from the outside in. You were who you were because of what you did, who you were responsible for, and what role you occupied in a structure larger than yourself. Your job told you who you were. Your marriage told you who you were. Your children told you who you were. Your role in the community told you who you were. All of that, the job, the household, the provider role, the fixer role, the protector role, I call it the identity noise. Not because it was fake, it was real, it was important, it was yours. But it was loud. Loud enough that for 40 years, you never had to ask the quieter question. Who am I when none of those structures are running? Now those structures have either ended or significantly changed. The noise stopped. And what's left isn't nothing, but it isn't labeled yet. And unlabeled things in silence feel like emptiness, even when they're not empty at all. Every man who successfully navigates living alone after 60 does one thing that most men resist. He stops treating the silence as a problem and starts treating it as information. The silence isn't the disease. It's the first diagnosis that's honest about what was always there and what's been asking to be heard for longer than you know. Payoff 1. The real fear underneath living alone, and why it's not what most people call it. When men over 60 search for living alone or male loneliness epidemic, The assumption is that they're afraid of being lonely. That's not quite right. Here's what the research on older men living alone actually shows, not the generic advice articles, the real psychological studies. The primary fear is not loneliness. The primary fear is irrelevance, not being alone, not mattering. I spent 40 years being essential to my job, to my family, to the people who needed things from me. My value was structural, functional. I was valuable because I was useful. Now I wake up in the morning and ask what requires me today. And the honest answer, most mornings, is nothing. That's the thing that sits in the quiet, not the absence of people, the absence of needing. And here's what makes it more complex. American men of this generation were not taught, explicitly or implicitly, that their value could exist outside of function, that they could matter not because of what they did, but because of who they were. That was never part of the instruction set. So when the function ends, and the function always ends, what remains doesn't feel like a man. It feels like a man-shaped room with nothing in it. That's the fear. Not loneliness, irrelevance. And it is a real fear. And it deserves to be named before it can be answered. Payoff 2. Why stay busy is the most common advice and why it doesn't work, for men specifically. Here's what well-meaning people say to men living alone. Stay busy, get involved, keep active, join things, don't let yourself sit. The advice isn't wrong. Activity is better than stagnation. Connection is better than isolation. But stay busy answers the wrong question. Stay busy assumes the problem is idleness. The problem isn't idleness. The problem is that every activity that fills the day is a temporary patch over the question that has nothing to do with what you're doing and everything to do with who you're being. Here's what the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest-running study on human happiness ever conducted, 85 years of data, actually found. The men who thrived in their 60s, 70s, and 80s were not the men who stayed busiest. They were the men who had developed what the researchers called a secure internal relationship with themselves. The ability to be alone without being empty. The ability to derive meaning from within rather than requiring it to be delivered from outside. The ability to wake up in the morning and have a reason that belongs to them, not to a role, not to a structure, not to someone else's need. That skill, and it is absolutely a skill, is what stay busy actually prevents you from developing. Because every time you fill the silence before you've learned to sit with it, you delay the one conversation that changes everything. The conversation with yourself about who you actually are when no one is watching and nothing requires you. If that landed somewhere true in you, type conversion in the comments. Because the man who's going to read your comment at 11 p.m. tonight in his quiet house, in his quiet kitchen, needs to know someone else recognized it too. This is the most important thing I need you to understand before we go any further. The quiet isn't empty. You are. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to say something simply. You're not here because you're falling apart. You're here because something in you knows there's a more honest way to live in this chapter of your life than what you've been doing. The next section is about that. Not recovery, not coping. The actual architecture of what I call the quiet conversion. The shift from a man defined by what he does to a man defined by who he is. It's the most difficult and the most important transition a man can make. Most men never do it because no one tells them it's possible. It is. Payoff 3. What the irrelevance fear is actually saying and why it's the right question asked the wrong way. When a man at 65 sits in his quiet house and feels irrelevant, the emotion is real. The diagnosis isn't. Here's what's actually happening. The part of you that's feeling irrelevant is the part that was defined by function, the provider, the achiever, the responsible one, the man who was valued because he was useful. That part of you is feeling irrelevant because that part's time is over. Not your time, that role's time. And here is the critical distinction that changes everything. The man who built the career, raised the kids, showed up for 40 years. That man is not the same as the role he occupied. The role ended. The man is still here. And the man still has something that no one can take away, and that doesn't require a job title or a household to need him. He has what he learned. He has what he sees. He has what he knows about how life actually works. Not in theory, but from having lived it. That is not nothing. That is more than most people in the world have. The irrelevance fear is not telling you that you're no longer valuable. It's telling you that the old proof of your value is gone, and you haven't found the new proof yet. That's a search, not a conclusion. Payoff 4. The most important distinction nobody makes when talking to men about living alone. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. They feel similar in the body at first, especially for men who've never lived alone before. Both involve quiet. Both involve no other people. But they come from completely different sources, and they lead to completely different places. Loneliness is the experience of involuntary disconnection. You want connection. Connection is absent. That gap hurts. It's an external condition. Something is missing from outside. Solitude is the experience of voluntary presence, not in the absence of others, but in the presence of yourself. It's an internal condition. You are here with yourself, and that is enough. Research on older adults, specifically gerontological research, shows something counterintuitive. Adults over 60 who have developed comfort with solitude report higher well-being, more positive emotional states, and greater life satisfaction than adults of the same age who require constant social stimulation. Not because they're more alone, because they've developed what the researchers call positive solitude, the ability to be with themselves without requiring that experience to be filled by others. The critical finding? Men who live alone and suffer from chronic loneliness share one characteristic. They have not developed a relationship with themselves. Their entire identity was external. When the external scaffolding was removed, the job, the marriage, the role, there was no internal architecture to stand on. Men who live alone and report genuine peace also share one characteristic. They developed, at some point, often in their 60s, the capacity to be their own company. Not in a narcissistic way, in the way that a man who knows who he is doesn't need the room to be full to know that he is not empty. I want to say something at the 8-minute mark that I mean genuinely. You stayed. Not because you needed more tips, because something here is naming what you've been carrying in the quiet, and you wanted to hear it named. The next 3 practices I'm about to give you are not coping mechanisms. They're the architecture of the quiet conversion itself, the actual internal moves that distinguish men who find peace in solitude from men who find only loneliness in the same silence. The practices are simple. They are not easy. But nothing that actually matters is easy at first. You know that better than most people. You've lived enough to know that. Practice 1. The morning pages practice. Not journaling, not therapy writing. This specific. Every morning for 30 days, before you look at your phone, before you turn on the news, write by hand 3 pages about anything. Not goals, not gratitude lists, anything. What you're thinking, what you dreamed, what you're angry about, what you remember, what the coffee tastes like today, what you wish you'd said to someone years ago. The rule is, keep the pen moving. Don't edit. Don't perform. Write as if no one will ever read it, because no one will. Here's why this is the first practice. For most men over 60, there is no space in the day where they are genuinely alone with their own thoughts without managing, performing, or producing something. Even sitting alone in the quiet, the mind is managing, reviewing, planning, worrying. It is rarely just being here, saying what's true. The 3 pages practice creates, often for the first time in decades, a space where you hear your own voice without an audience and without a purpose. What men report consistently after 2 to 3 weeks, the silence in the house changes character. It doesn't get louder, it gets more familiar. Like learning the sounds of a new house. You stop bracing against them. You start hearing them clearly. The practice doesn't solve the silence. It teaches you to inhabit it. Practice 2, the sovereign hour. Every day, 1 hour, no media, no phone, not exercise, though movement is included, not errands, though they can happen during it. 1 hour of deliberate, unmediated presence in your own day. Walk, sit on a bench, work in the garden. Do something with your hands that doesn't require your attention. It's the mind, not the hands, that matters. The specific rule? No audio input, no podcasts, no music, no phone calls, just you and whatever is in front of you. Here's the research behind this. Studies on psychological restoration in older adults show that unmediated time in natural or semi-natural environments, even urban parks, even quiet streets, produces measurable reductions in cortisol, anxiety, and rumination within 20 to 30 minutes. But the deeper reason this practice matters is not biochemical. It's that modern life has almost entirely eliminated the experience of being alone with your own perceptions. Every silence is filled. Every waiting moment is occupied. We have not been alone with ourselves, truly alone, since the smartphone arrived. Men who live alone have the conditions for this practice. The quiet house can be an asset here, not a problem to solve, but a platform for something rare. Genuine, unmediated presence in your own life. The sovereign hour doesn't require a special location. It requires that you show up, without distraction, to the hour that is entirely yours. You'll hate it the first week. By the 3rd week, you'll protect it. Practice 3, the legacy project. Not in the dramatic sense, not a memoir or a monument. This, identify one thing that you know from 60+ years of actually living that you want to exist in some form after you're no longer here to say it. It might be a recorded conversation with your grandchildren about what you learned about money or marriage or what you wish you'd done differently. A collection of letters, written, never sent, to people who matter to you. A physical project made by your hands that someone will use after you. A document, not legal, not formal, that says what you actually believe about how to live. Here's why this is the 3rd practice and not the first. The irrelevance fear, the one that sits in the quiet at 65 and says, you don't matter anymore, has one specific antidote. Not staying busy, not staying connected. Purpose that outlasts the present moment. The Harvard study found that men who developed what the researchers called generativity in their 60s, the sense of contributing something that extends beyond their immediate daily life, reported the highest levels of life satisfaction, the slowest cognitive decline, and the lowest rates of late-life depression. Generativity is not about being remembered. It's about giving something real to the people and the world that come after you. You have something to give. It doesn't require a platform or an audience. It requires only that you decide what it is and begin. That decision, and the doing of it, is the last thing the irrelevance fear can survive. I want to say something that takes a moment to hear. The quiet in your house. The quiet that brought you to this video. It's not a sentence. It's not the universe telling you that your most useful years are behind you, that you've been parked somewhere to wait out the rest of your life. That is not what is happening. What is happening is this. For 40 or 50 years, you moved through your life at the speed the world required. The job required it. The mortgage required it. The family required it. The role required it. You moved at that speed. You did what was required. You gave what was asked. And somewhere in that giving, not because you failed, but because you were busy doing what needed doing, you set down the quieter version of yourself. Not abandoned, just set down. The way you set down a bag when you have somewhere urgent to be. The quiet is not empty. The quiet is where that version of you has been waiting. Not lost, not diminished, not replaced by whatever you became in the years of noise. Still there, quieter now, patient in the way that things are patient when they have nowhere else to go. This chapter, living alone, the house quiet, the schedule yours, is not the subtraction everyone treats it as. It is the first chapter in the entire story of your life where everything you do is done for no one but the truth. Here is what I know about you, not as a demographic, as a man who has watched his life long enough to know what shows up on the other side of the questions you've been carrying. You are not old. You are at the beginning of the part of your life that requires the most and the most specific kind of courage. Not the courage of doing hard things for others. You've done that for decades. The courage of sitting in a quiet house and deciding that the man in that house is worth building something around. Not because someone needs you to, not because a role requires you to, because it's true, because you're still here, because the silence in your house is waiting for you to fill it not with noise, but with whatever you actually are when you stop performing for everyone else. Men who make that decision, who complete what I'm calling the quiet conversion, don't report that life got busier. They report that life got clearer. They stopped waiting for the noise to come back, and in the stillness they found not loss, not emptiness, but the first honest silence of their lives. And in it, finally, themselves. One question before you go. What was the moment, the specific moment, when you first noticed the quiet had changed character? When it stopped being absence and started being something else? Write it below. Not because I'm analyzing anything, because there's a man watching this at 10:30 at night in a quiet house he's not sure yet how to inhabit, and he needs to read the answer from someone who has been where he is. You were where he is. If something here helped you name what you're carrying, subscribe. We build tools here for men who are done being told that their most important chapter is already behind them. It isn't. It's the quiet one. Stay sovereign.